What does it take to produce one of the greatest simultaneous games of all time? In this simultaneous game, the great world chess champion Mikhail Tal is going to show his incredible tactical brilliance, but he's going to be almost matched by the amateur Jack Miller, and together they produce a truly magnificent game. In most simuls, the master takes white, and this game is no exception. Tal begins with e4, and his opponent Miller responds classically. After bishop c4, the Italian game, Miller responds with knight f6, and Tal decides to offer d4 here, entering the Max Lang attack. Now, at this point, I want to take a small detour and recommend a line for you if you play against this. I really recommend the great line e takes d4, and after white castles, don't be afraid, as many people are if they've never seen this position before, to play knight takes e4. You do walk into a pin after rook e1, but you're okay after d5. However, white does have a spectacular move, and if you've never seen it before, you probably have a small heart attack at this point. Bishop takes d5 is centuries-old theory, but after queen takes d5, knight c3 with a double pin here on the queen and the knight. The queen can move, we can take here, but black is fine now if you just go ahead and play bishop e6 and castle queenside. No worries at all. I have tried to win this position as white. I have not succeeded. You can use this too if you want. So after d4, Miller plays, instead of the excellent move captures on d4, the somewhat passive move pawn to d6. It's not a terrible move, but it's definitely not the best move. It does close off this bishop a little bit. Tal decides to take on e5, and now Miller really should have just taken back right here. There's nothing to fear from the queen exchange. It's totally okay for black. Instead, he plays knight takes e4, which is a mistake. But this is not a mistake because of the seemingly devastating queen d5, which threatens mate on f7 and threatens the knight. Black is okay here after bishop e6. We pick up the loose knight, and then black has one last move, pawn to d5 with a fork, regaining the material and getting a perfectly fine position as black. So instead, Tal plays bishop takes f7, which is the best move, and now basically by reversing the order of moves and playing queen d5 second instead of first, he's able to pick off the knight on e4 and get a great position. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking that Miller's really toast here. This is a classic simul game. The master is basically winning on move 8, and there shouldn't be much interesting to come from here, but there's so many things that await us. We're going to zip through the next few moves as both players kind of get their pieces into the game and try to tend to their king's safety. Miller's going to try to hide the king on e8 because he can't easily move this rook because h7 hangs, so he instead tries to slide the king over to e8 and get away that way. Tal's doing maybe not the best moves. It's still a simul, so Tal has less time and he's not playing his perfect game, but he's doing everything right up through this point. And now Miller tries to get some counter chances, which works out way better than he probably thought it would. At this point, Tal plays knight takes e6, which is the right move. Miller takes on f2. We get a fork here, and then takes on e1. Let's pause to assess here for a moment. At this point, Tal has captured a bishop on e6, while Miller has captured a rook on e1. So Tal has sacrificed an exchange. But obviously there's tons of stuff going on in this position. There is an exchange that can be picked up here on f8. There's also a loose bishop here that looks pretty vulnerable to some discoveries. And both kings are a little bit unsafe. Of course, Miller's not too happy that his king is on e8, although it doesn't look to be getting mated anytime soon, and Tal has some back rank issues that he's got to worry about. It's a good moment to pause your video and try to figure out what you would have played. The best move is really not obvious, and it wasn't found by Tal in this position. So the right move here is knight takes d5. Really a cool little move. Now, the basic point here is that neither knight can be captured. For example, the flashy and seemingly really cool queen takes d5 here doesn't run into queen takes because there's a back rank mate over here, but it does run into knight takes c7 with a royal fork. We can recapture with the knight, and we are simply going to win black's queen and the game. And Of course, there's also the point that black here doesn't have to capture either knight, which is one of the tricky things about playing knight takes d5 here. You have to not only assess what happens if black goes for a capture of the knights, you also have to ask yourself what happens if black doesn't do anything here to capture any of these loose pieces. Basically, the answer is that we're still threatening to get the exchange here, which is going to be good. And we're threatening to take on c7. A lot of times when we take on c7, we'll be getting after the black king, bringing the bishop out as well. This is a really strong position, even though we're agreeing to stay down material for a little while. And it's certainly what Tal would have played if he had a little more time to think about the position. Instead, Tal plays knight takes f8 here, which is a mistake, although it's not at all obvious why it is a mistake at this point. Miller takes back with the rook, developing the rook and eyeing the back rank, obviously. Obviously, you cannot take on d5, by the way, because now queen takes d5 does work, and if you capture, then you're going to get mated on the back rank. Tal's not going to fall for that, of course, and he plays bishop to g5 in this position, bringing out the bishop, eyeing the loose bishop on e1 and seeming to cover his back rank. It looks like the game should just basically be over. It's easy now, right? Basically, the bishop on e3 maybe trades itself on c3 and we're good. We've got our back rank covered, no problems. Unfortunately, Miller now has a very good move and he does find it. He plays knight to b4. And at this point, Tal probably started having a small heart attack because Miller finds not just one, but multiple great moves. Knight b4, of course, is trying to get the queen to leave the defense of f1 so that black can checkmate. Tal's only move to defend the queen and cover the checkmate is to retreat back to e2, continuing to cover f1. Miller now has another great move, and he does find it again. He plays knight takes on c2. Again, the knight cannot be captured, and now the knight is threatening this loose rook on a1. It is possible for Tal to capture here, which looks like a pretty good material exchange, but after pawn to d4 here hitting the knight, and then bringing in the queen to poke at the back rank, Miller's actually doing really, really well here. His pieces coordinate much better, and he has material equality in this position. It's very complicated, but Miller's doing well. Instead, after knight takes c2, Tal proceeds with pawn e6, the sharper move, which of course we can expect from Tal. So he's attacking the queen, which needs to move. Now, Miller makes a mistake, although honestly, if he found the right move here, I would think that he was using a computer, except that it was 1988 when this game was played, so if he used a computer, he'd probably play much worse than his actual level. The correct move here is queen to c6. Very hard to see this move, but after the rook moves, remember it's attacked by this knight, so it needs to get out of that attack. d4 is a really, really strong move. We're hitting the knight, and we're threatening rook f2. And if the knight were to go here, we could just capture it, which is crunch and game over. The back rank mate really, really has been the doom for white in this game. So queen c6 would have been really, really strong in this position, and had Miller found it, which would have been insane, but had he found it, he might have finished off his brilliancy against Mikhail Tal. Instead, after queen to d6, it's going to be Tal that wins the brilliancy, as now it is he who's winning, and he does find the right move. He plays knight b5, which is a little bit of an echo of Miller's knight b4 just a moment ago. He's hitting the queen, and he's also hitting this c7 square if the queen is not defending c7. Knight takes c7 is a really beautiful checkmate. The bishop, pawn, and the knight will cover all of the black king's escape squares. So the queen moves to e5. 2 exclamation points. This doesn't save the game, but it's a magnificent move. After queen e5, everything is hanging. I just love this position. It's absolute chaos. Of course, we can't capture the queen because of the back rank mate. We also can't capture the knight because of the back rank mate. Meanwhile, black is threatening the bishop right over here, which would be a really great piece to capture because that would stop the checkmates from the knight taking on c7. And black is also pointing at the queen, but not really threatening to capture the queen because then white would have mate. So there's actually kind of a hilarious situation here where the queens are facing off against each other, but neither queen can capture the other queen right here. I really can't think of any other time that I've seen that in a chess game. This is the only time I can think of two queens staring at each other and neither can capture the other because of a checkmate. It's really, really special. So there is a winning move here for Tal, and he does find it. I encourage you to pause your video and find the strongest move in this position. So I want to remind you that this is a simul game. Tal is making an orbit here where he's playing like 20 or 30 players. I don't know how many were in this simul in 1988, but a lot of players playing against the great Mikhail Tal. He's got just seconds to look at each board, and he's moving on to the next one. And he does find the move pawn to h4 right here. This move is fantastic. With everything hanging, you just take time out here to push a rook pawn and make luft right here. Now the king is not getting back rank checkmated, and we defended the bishop on g5 that was loose. So the move covers everything we need covered. Now black's pieces are actually hanging for the first time in a little while. And because the queen is hanging at this point, Miller goes ahead and moves it to the only safe square, queen g3. We still need some spectacular moves to finish this game off though. And at this point, Tal plays rook to d1, eyeing some activity on the d file. And it looks like he might get busted again by rook f2 because Miller keeps bringing the punches. Miller attacks the queen on e2 and threatens mate right here. Is Miller winning the game now? Not quite. We have queen takes f2 for Tal. He plays this and then he takes on d5, and there's simply no good way to stop rook to d8 and checkmate. In the end, after all the difficulties that white had with the back rank and the possibility for black with queen c6 to really put a ton of pressure on Tal, it is the black king on e8 that proves to be the more vulnerable. Now, Miller does continue, but I'm going to whip through the rest of the moves because this is over. That threat on d8 is just too strong. Miller gives up the queen right here, but knight takes c7 is a great move. Not only are we up in exchange, but this e-pawn is really strong. Tal doubles around here. As it's a simul game, his technique wasn't the best that it could have been, but he gets back around over to the 7th rank after doubling over to the f-file for a moment, and he plays a nice little combination here, sacrificing to eliminate the bishop that was holding back the e-pawn. And now the e-pawn is able to go through, and at this point Miller decides that's enough. I got my chance to play Tal. I gave him everything I had, and it's time to resign. So I hope that you enjoyed that game. This is the simul game that we all wish we could play against a master like Mikhail Tal. Okay, we wish we could win, but losing a game like this is winning in its own way. Basically, it's an incredibly special opportunity to go toe-to-toe with a champion and, you know, really show your worth and show that for a while in this game you were their equal. And Miller was 1600, so the moves that he found were just moves of a lifetime. It's so special to have a simul game like this, the greatest simul game of all time. If you like this video, please do subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future videos. And I have a playlist with more games from Mikhail Tal if you want to see some more of his spectacular play against other famous players.